fully, you could actually have a very good cross ventilation with wind coming in, breezes coming in on either direction, and then exiting at a higher level. But what it also does, it also gives you a very well-balanced lighting within the spaces. You almost don't need to have too much mechanical lighting in the daytime. So this is one of the later houses where we were able to lay on a little bit more of a sort of double skin. But from this picture, you can actually see very clearly it is made of vertical walls and then program and spaces being wrapped by a sun shading screen to shade the site that actually looks out onto the garden. So in terms of the plan, you can see it is a layer of walls, and these walls have open-ended to bring in light as well as ventilation. And then you again have one layer of accommodation and spaces. So this is a section. You can see the walls and the rooms, and then the curved arcing environmental filter. There's a close-up of the walls as breezeways, funneling the wind in, reflecting light into the spaces as well. And this is the screen. These screens are designed in such a way that it will actually allow, it's very good, effective cross ventilation. It doesn't look so, but it's actually calculated with micro fins, but in a fine manner that actually provides very good shading. And yet at the same time, allows you to look out and enjoy the garden view. So this is a series of 3 houses on a very irregular site. But what is quite interesting was our interpretation of the old sort of shop houses, where we are required to use the courtyards, the airwells for ventilation. So this is a site matrix, the black and white. The blacks are the spaces that allows us to have these courtyards to ventilate the building, the deep plans. It's a series of courtyards, and these courtyards are usually either vertical spaces that actually allows the hot air to escape from the top, or they are swimming pools, internal water gardens. So this is the plan that you can see. It's the combination of vertical spaces, which is the staircases, and then the swimming pools in between the program, which is the living and the dining rooms. So it ended up a very interesting matrix of sort of black and white spaces, but they are actually, for us as well, at the same time, it is what is enclosable as air-conditioned spaces and what is not air-conditioned spaces. I think one of the general principles we have is that to be environmentally sound in our design, we do need to take a look at the program and to see what do we need to air condition. Most people tend to air condition the entire house, but we think that it's actually more important to just air condition maybe the living spaces and the bedroom spaces, but all the other spaces at the end of the day can be very transient spaces where you move around, and that they can actually be non-air conditioned and actually be spaces that you can actually enjoy the natural elements rather than to be in a sealed space. But in any case, we try to make all our windows and openings to our our air-conditioned spaces operable, so that you actually also have the option to use the spaces as non-air-conditioned accommodations. So as you can see, the section, the 3-story courtyard is a vertical circulation, and the narrow one is actually a reflection pool. So as you see them, it is actually the reinterpretation of the shop house, where you can actually see one airwell, one courtyard, a swimming pool, And then the other one is actually a vertical circulation that actually has a high level vents and also a skylight that allows the hot air and to actually get out. But at the same time, you will realize that we have sort of timber louvers on the side. When they're fully open, it also allows very good cross ventilation within the long plans of these houses. So this is slightly bigger. So it's a scale up house, we call it. And we adopted a lot of the similar principles. But if we were to calculate the carbon about this building, perhaps this one would do very well, because this building, when this hotel that we designed, we told the clients we really wanted to do a very sustainable design from first principles that included construction as well. So all the materials that we use, the skills and labor, were either from Bali itself or from within the region. We tried to minimize the import of materials and equipment only if they are not available within Indonesia. But I think we managed to do very well. A lot of the things that we ended up using were mostly from Indonesia, partly because also they were cheaper. It also worked for the clients as well. But they're essentially one-story building, most of them. And at the time, we wanted to, we also convinced the clients to use clean energy. We didn't actually put solar panels on the roof, primarily because there was going to be a sort of a wind farm located within the southern part of Bali. And that there was a tie-up within the hotel and this leasing company to provide the clean energy for it. But somewhere along the line, that didn't materialize. So it was a rather disappointing thing that we couldn't employ clean energy for this development. But all the other aspects of it, we think we've done very well. But I think it's still possible in the future when the wind farms are being executed, put in place in this part, or solar farms, we can actually plug back into this clean energy grid. But here you can see all the materials are almost handcrafted using as much as possible local and regional skills of Indonesia, and trying, again, I like to use the word holistic and wellness, because we like to see the livelihood of traditional skills and craft being perpetuated. Sustainability is not just about reducing just to about carbon emission and climate change. It's also about seeing and ensuring skills and crafts to have perpetuity. This is southern part of Bali, where it doesn't rain a lot. Because of that, water is a very precious element, and we wanted to celebrate water by harvesting all the water we can actually get and be able to reuse them. We have implemented also a grey water system here. And once the development is placed and it's actually fully occupied, there's enough grey water system to recycling of water for most of the users of the toilets and the non-potable uses, and also irrigation of the landscaping. So you can also see the timber here are different lengths, because we made it fairly fashionable to do this randomized timber slats. And primarily because we were among the first to use recycled wood, and this were actually either railway sleepers or sort of a telephone line poles, and they were only of a particular length, and that and we have to use different ways to make the design work. So they are being used in its almost original length that we found them, but just to plane them down to a regular size and length. So here is the a fairly iconic image for the hotel and also for Indonesia. And I think it's the celebration of the recycled timber. And also at the same time, the metalwork here was actually being cast in Java, and that we were quite happy to be able to sort of make use of local skills and crafts. So even the stones were from Bali itself, the volcanic stones, and some were actually on the nearby island in Java for the white stones. And here you can see we are celebrating the water through having a lot of reflection pool. And the hotel actually does a good job at telling the story why we wanted to have so much water element, even though this is a sort of a dry region and sort of a arid climate. But it is very important that we see it and appreciate it, and that we have done enough to sort of recycle and make good use of the grey water system. So even the stone cladding here, you can see are actually stones from the site itself. When we sort of made platforms for the buildings, we actually harvested all the stones to use it as cladding for the walls. And what is actually quite important about this room plan is that they're designed as garden walls and also walls that funnel the wind in. Basically, this is sort of facing the ocean. You get a lot of sea breezes. So the idea was to capture the sea breeze, but you have this return wall at the back that provides the privacy to the bathroom and the room, but it also allows the cross ventilation to go to the back as well. So if you see in a section, the breezes would be a funnel through the front, through the swimming pool, that can help to cool it a little bit, and then it exit at the back through the courtyard. So a view from within looking out to the ocean, and that's where the sea breezes are. So what is really nice was that when we worked with the hotel, the hotelier, and that the design was really based on very sound principles of sustainability, they took it as a marketing strategy as well. So one of the first things they would do is to ask a guest who's going to come to this resort, because this hotel is designed from the principle of sustainability, we'd like to encourage you to keep your rooms non-air conditioned as much as possible. But we are more than happy to turn down your room and close up the windows and doors so that when you sleep, we can air condition it. As it turns out, a lot of the guests follow this and actually keep the rooms naturally ventilated in the day. Only at the night, it is closed down for them to sleep. So scaling up the house a little bit, we talk about another design. And this one is a church of St. Mary of the Angels. This was done quite long ago too, almost more than 20 years ago. And I think this one for us is really about public space and private space. And this is a very community-centric design where we do need to ensure this is a gathering space for the community, and there is also growth as well. In the long run, there will be future phases. In fact, we were meant to start on it, but then it was put off again due to the financial matters, as well as also the COVID crisis as well, where we're going to build in elderly facilities and more community spaces as well. But this is the party that we had, where in the center, we had the open community space. And on one side, we have a garden space. And then on the other side, we have the roofed over a chapel for the church itself, of course. And then we plugged on other things like the nunnery and the monastery and some other community spaces. So this is the plan. You can actually see the church on one side, and behind that is actually a nunnery. It was planned as a nunnery. but it was not quite used as a nunnery, but it was used as a monastery. On the top two is actually another monastery, but on the right side is actually a garden space, and below the garden space is a columbarium. So all the spaces are conceived as good public spaces for this community, and also at the same time creating very private spaces for the priests and for the nuns. But as you can see from this section, the garden space steps down because underneath there is actually a varying height for the, we call them chapels as well, but they are actually the columbarium where you would put the urns of your loved one when they pass away. And below that is actually the car parking. There's a central space, which is the plaza, which is a drop-off, but on most occasions, they use this as a gathering space for the community. And then the roof over space is the church. But you can see there's a very deep overhang because within the roof itself, not only do we have the structure, we have natural sky lighting to bring the light in, and also high-level ventilation, so that this church space, even though it's for a congregation of 1,200, can be used as a naturally ventilated chapel in the mornings where they have smaller crowds. So you can see it's actually designed with the front having doors that can be open throughout, so that you can actually allow the wind, the breezes to go in and then exit at a high level. And again, here you saw the very large canopy roof, because we also wanted to create a very large veranda that is protected from the rain and from the sun, so they can actually have community events on the front of the church. So you can actually see those slots at the back, the vertical slots. Above them where we have the high-level vents. So in the daytime or in the mornings, they will open the windows or doors in the front, and then the hot air would escape from the top and had a fairly good sort of a cross ventilation across the space. But when it's crowded like that, it's actually designed to be air conditioned. What is also nice about this was, for us, it was more than just the architecture. It was a fully integrated design where we designed the architecture and the full interiors, including the lighting and landscaping. All this furniture were designed with a brief that would last for 100 years. They want to make sure that what we have here can last for as long as 100 years. So we did source very good oak wood from Russia, and we actually use a sort of a granite for some of these religious artifacts within the church itself. So this is the columbarium. The panels on the walls are where the urns are placed behind. The space above this vertical spine is actually the fire and engine access, but it also allows natural light to come in. But what it actually also does for us, these spaces are very nice, airy and bright spaces. They are enclosed spaces, very suited to people having a very quiet moment with their loved ones within these chapel spaces. So here, when it rains or when it's sunny, you still see the sun coming in, or when the rain comes in. It's actually very beautiful, very sort of, I think when it rains, when the rain comes in, this is a very magical space. So we even designed the little tea candles where they can light and place onto the plinth next to the water. We moved up again to a different type of buildings, and here we started looking at MRT stations. This was again more than 20 years ago. We won two MRT station competitions, and both of them are quite different, but also designed based on very sound sustainable principles. Here was a station that was one of the deepest in Singapore then, but facing one of our heritage building, St. Joseph Institution, and that there were requirements to keep very clear sightlines between heritage buildings. We took this as an opportunity to create a very interesting public space on top, where the reflection pool is also the skylight for the very, very deep station. It's also the foreground to the SMU sort of administration building, I think. No, it's not the administration building, one of the key buildings. So here you can actually see the cross section of the station. People will be brought down through two long escalators under the skylight, which is also the reflection pool. It's actually centered on this heritage building, which is the Singapore Art Museum now. And it allows a very nice reflection for the heritage building to celebrate the heritage building, and also to create a wonderful water feature as a public space for the city. But what is also really quite nice is when the pool was designed to be like a mirror as well. When you don't light it, you can actually reflect the heritage building. And here was one of those occasions where they lit up as an artwork, art display for the Singapore Art Museum, and we managed to capture this reflection in the reflection pool. But as you are inside the station, you can actually see, you can actually have natural light coming down, and you can actually see the silhouette of the trees. But you also have this rippling effect because the water is very shallow. It's only about 100 to 150 millimeters of water, but it's moving so that we actually take the heat away from the water to keep this space cool. And you actually see this rippling of the shadows on this reflective wall. This wall is actually slightly angled because it's actually south-facing, so that it will reflect the light into the deepest part of the MRT station. So here is the this is the platform level where the trains arrives and leaves, and you can actually see, you can almost see natural light still coming in. So this is one of the strongest element about the design that won the competition, that even you are at the lowest level, you are still able to sense where you are in terms of where the natural light is coming, and also you can see the silhouette of trees. So from escape purposes in MRT station, it is actually very important to know your way around. That brings us to the next MRT station that we also were commissioned at the same time, because we won both the competitions at the same time. This one was about, it's actually located next to the stadium, and it's about search crowds. The sort of guidance that were given by the competition was to set the stadium quite low in the ground, so that you actually have an open space on the ground. But we chose to actually push the building up instead, but to use one straight wall and one curved wall to help funnel the search crowd into the station. But we felt that it was actually necessary to elevate the station to rather hold the crowd on ground where they are safe, rather than to hold them within the MRT station. Then they wait and then they go out. So it was a reverse thinking, but by pushing it up, we actually save a lot of costs as well. So that was sort of a very effective way of addressing costs and trying to do more interesting architectural elements within it. So you can see the translation of the curved wall and the straight wall. And because it's actually pushed up, it was a very narrow plan. We really wanted to naturally ventilate this station. It was actually conceived as a naturally ventilated station, but MRT didn't quite like that, because they were fixed on having their standards met, that all the station was actually sealed and air conditioned. But what's interesting is that on a day-to-day, they keep the doors open and not actually use it and sort of reduce the air conditioning time as well. So from here, you can actually see is actually the internal walls are made of louvers. They are actually in different angles, and actually the higher up ones you can see over here is actually where you can see through, and they were originally where we wanted the cross ventilation to be. But when you're at that level, you can actually see right through the building. So this is at the very bottom. We chose to use a very cool material to give people a feeling of cool, sort of coolness. Primarily because I think when you're in the stadium, you're in a very sort of I think it's an open stadium, so you get hot. We think that we wanted when people come into stadium, this station, they would see this watery surface and feel cool instead. So this is definitely a very different building typology for us. It was not there are very few little new elements here, but this building in front is a new element, and some of the walkways are new element. But this is actually A&A repurposing of a sort of a educational building. One of those IEs that was built in the 70s, located in Red Hill. Enabling is a inclusive development for all abilities, and it's actually created to sort of engender an inclusive society. So this project came to us, and when we looked at it and we were asked whether we could take on this challenge, we felt it was very necessary to convince these clients, which is the Social Services of Singapore, and say, if you really want to be inclusive, we do want to be able to open up the whole development to the public. And the best way to do it is not to have any fence or to be gated. You can see the old facility was gated, and also at the same time, it has most of the surfaces were actually car parking. And I think there is so much, this is the plan that we before the sort of repurposing and the renovation of this building. You can see there's very little landscaping within it. They are mostly sort of turf and dry areas, and lots of car parking and roads within it. We felt this was a very sort of symbolic of the 70s and 80s period, where I mean this century, or rather the 20th century, that celebrated vehicles. Roads are everywhere. We plan buildings to be convenient to cars, but not to people. So I think this is something that we do need to rethink, how we plan cities, master plans and buildings, where we should really prioritize the community and people and nature rather than vehicles. So this was our plan, was to reduce as much of the car parking as possible, and to make a very efficient car parking on the site, but open it up as much as possible and to turn it into a public park with buildings in it. And it's actually open, the fences are removed, and as much as possible, this place is actually open 24 hours a day, allowing people to come in and out without the sort of being worried that you are going to another facility. Here is a park setting. We wanted people to come in. So we transform all those road spaces in between buildings that were actually for servicing and for effecting sort of fire engine access. We limited all those as much as possible. We turfed them as well, and we created very lush tropical gardens within it. I mean, at the end of the day, what was really interesting about this was that this is almost right in the middle of Singapore. And this is an area, Red Hill, where I think it's an area that requires more park spaces. So when we turn this into park spaces, we actually see the community, the neighborhood, the people coming in. And we even see young couples here, you know, in courtship. And we felt that we had succeeded in bringing people in. But one of the nice things to note was that once this is finished, a year later, we had visitors of a different kind, hornbills as well as otters. And it was really nice to see them coming in almost so far into sort of an urban area to actually live in this sort of a natural habitat that we created. So there was also a lot of repurposing of containers. It was not a project about being sort of new and clean and elegant and beautiful, but it was one about being able to repurpose architectural buildings as well as other components as well, shipping, mobility elements as well. So you can see we had, we repurposed the containers. We also repurposed the oil tanks. So it was a fairly interesting exercise for us to try and recreate new uses for some of these use elements. But we also wanted to demonstrate that you can create amphitheater for people in wheelchair. So this is a wheelchair-friendly amphitheater. And that we wanted this outdoor amphitheater to be the focus element, the focus space within this inclusive facility. So this was also repurposed sewer pipes. We turned them into nice little quiet reading nooks. And all the spaces in the building now, instead of looking into cars and roads, they look into trees, shrubs, water gardens, and a park. This is another small development for us. But what is interesting is that this is right on Orchard Road. This is a very short lease, a 20-year lease to JTC. It was to build a showcase for Singapore brands. But we won this competition to build this small little building on the grounds that previously this was a little butterfly park in this corner of Orchard Road and Cairnhill. We wanted to actually keep it and recreate it into a public space, an event space, and a little urban park. So as you can see from, this section, it's a very small building. It's only 2.5 story, but the roof is the most important element for us. It is both a landscape park and also a outdoor amphitheater event space. We wanted both nature, and we also wanted people to be able to have events and activities on the amphitheater and on the roof. It's sloping because we wanted it to feel like it's an extension of the ground. we try to conceal as much the usable spaces below, and on the grounds that, you know, if you create an effective, useful public space, you also draw people to the sort of the shop itself, rather than the shop itself depending on the single brands to draw people in. We wanted to create a public space to draw the people in, and then people can actually then go into the shop. So you can see this is Orchard Road, and that the entire roof is landscape and also an event space. It sort of looks in the direction of the junction, and that we're hoping that they will bring back the closing down of Orchard Road, or to remove cars from Orchard Road. Then the orchard will be reinstated in Orchard Road, and this public space would then have become one with the orchard. So this is one of our definitely a fundamental shift in the way we place messing together. This I like to call this a block of cheese building, because there's more voids in this building than most of the other buildings you see around this picture. These voids are crucial because we are creating more surface area internally to effect cross ventilation, but they're also shaded and sheltered. That also becomes social spaces for the students. This building is the School of the Arts. It's actually a Performing and Visual Arts Specialized School of Singapore. Here you can see it's slightly, it's different from the other buildings because of the green vines that's growing on the facades. They help to filter the pollution, the noise, and the air a little bit. One layer of circulation space, which acts as the sun shading, and then the actual 1 unit thick classroom blocks. And that you have 2 blocks and a weight-shaped administration and performing arts facility as the corner block. So this section is important, where you can see the 2 classroom blocks are parallel, but in between them, we have larger facility like the library, which is the triple volume space, and then the lecture theater. They are sculpted and shaped to funnel wind into it. The other interesting nickname that we call this building is a wind machine, because we wanted to really engineer wind moving into the building. We have done post construction surveys. The moves that we made works very well. There is at least 5-degree difference in temperature between inside and outside, and that even though this building is located in the city, there is less carbon in the classroom as compared to the school buildings in the outer part of the outside the city itself. So what it translates it to is that the students are more alert because they have more oxygen within the classrooms than the ones outside the city. Even within the city itself, we can actually have this effective cross ventilation through the classrooms and higher oxygen level within the classrooms. But what is really also interesting is that all the spaces works as social spaces for the school, and that the students love all these informal spaces, and they all hang around longer than necessary. This is the lower level where we have the performing arts facilities. Again, one of the things that we started when we talk about creating a wind machine, we also like to talk about the fact that we try to avoid having dead ends within a building. Dead ends in a building means you're blocking the wind flow. It is actually in tropics and in Singapore, where we don't have high winds and we don't have typhoons, effective cross ventilation, no dead ends are excellent. But when you do developments in, say, a typhoon area like in Taiwan, which we do, we design breezeways like this too, very open porous plans, but we are also able to shut up the cross ventilation where it's necessary by using either wind shutters or by having doors and windows that actually can close it up. So the principle is that you still need to design porous buildings, but you also at times needs to be able to seal them up as well. So this, this is a public space. This tree is no longer there. It's lived to a ripe old age of more than, I think, 100. And then the tree finally was brought down 1-2 years ago. Otherwise, we created this large public space that is shaded by this tree. So this was an interesting contribution also to the city. Due to the undulating site, the ground level of the school, which is this level, is actually 1 story higher than the road level, and that allows us to create this sort of amphitheater terrace that steps up to the ground level of the school, and that this is done as a very generous steps and amphitheater, and the school does performances here for the public, which is really nice. But what we also see too is that we find a lot of informal gathering of performance here as well, not from a school, but from church groups and other sort of community groups coming here to do practicing and having a bit of passerbys as audience. So we created this term called tropical community spaces. This is a multi-purpose space. It's not a mono-use. It's for the purpose of the drop-off for the school. It's also the pre-function space for the auditorium behind. This is the sort of a double usage where you can use it for pre-function space, drop-off, and also the security and the lobby space for the students to move up from the ground floor to the 5th floor, where we have a safe and secure environment and the stratum for the academic spaces for this school facility. So this is the auditorium behind. And this is the 5th floor. And you can see what is interesting about this floor is that it's a very full, large floor plate. And this full, large floor plate provide the covered tropical community space below, which are all the pre-function spaces for the theaters, which are not air conditioned. Normally, if you go to Esplanade, all the pre-function spaces are enclosed. Here, we chose not to enclose them, and by reducing pre-function space are almost 30 to 40% of the event space itself. So we have reduced the cooling load by that proportion as well. Here you see this large footprint. This is an effective footprint. We call it a new ground level, where it's the assembly level for the specialized art school. The students who gather here every morning and to say their national pledge and sing their national anthem. But it's also the canteen and also the sort of a basketball space, a court as well. What's quite nice about this is that because this is on a 5th floor and it's a large floor plate, it also cuts away the sound that comes from the traffic. It is very quiet at this floor, primarily this large floor plate cuts away the sound that travels up, and that all the horizontal ceiling spaces, the soffits, are treated acoustically to actually absorb and diffuse the traffic noise. So it turns out a very nice assembly space, a very nice space in the city that's open, naturally ventilated, and not noisy. So this is when you come up the long escalator, you will actually look across to Fort Canning Hill, and then as you turn back will be the assembly space for the school. And as you turn back, this is what you see. And again, I like to point out that when you see something bright, at the end means it is not enclosed, it's not blocked. It's a true space here. It's a very good horizontal breezeway. So in some ways, I mentioned before, it was informed by our small little buildings in Maple House, where we had this breezeway, and the family stone here is actually scaled up into a large horizontal breezeway, a 6-story block classroom buildings with a covered space, true space that allows the wind and the breezes to move through. Again, you can see it's bright at the end. It's also bright behind where you can see the sun is coming. So both sides are really open. There's good cross ventilation, good light. And these are informal learning and teaching spaces for the students. Actually, what is really interesting is that when you see students here towards the end of the year, you'll see all of them wearing cardigans and hoodies. That's because of the good effective cross ventilation plus the lower temperatures. It actually feels like air conditioning comfort, and some of the students actually have to wear sweaters and hoodies. But we also created at the end of this, where we have good light and direct sunlight and sunshine, little pocket gardens, and this enhances the sort of social and public spaces within the schools. What is really nice that even though this is a 10-story buildings, we had a lot of very useful sky gardens at multiple levels. And at the very top is actually a recreational jogging track for the students. Okay, we changed typology now. We look at a vertical typology. This was our very first high-rise. We really wanted to rethink what was high-rise living in Singapore. I sort of grew up in a HDB flat. I do remember my parents would yell at me, "Go close the windows, it's raining, it's about to rain." And that, you know, you always have to go and close the windows when it rains, and it rains so often in Singapore. And at night when you sleep, you close them as well. So you don't really have a mechanism that allows you have to good cross ventilation, sort of rain or shine. So I think this is something that we thought is we need to work out a solution for this. And what when we researched it, a sort of traditional typologies and traditional buildings, we came across this Borneo longhouses that has this sort of horizontal breezeways, sort of a monsoon windows. So we reinterpreted this as the sketch next to it, where we have this using the vertical surface of the tower to direct the wind into the apartments through a horizontal sliding window. So we call this the monsoon window. Permanently, rain or shine, when it rains, actually when it rains, it's just so wonderful because there's always some breezes. It brings cool air into the apartments. It almost feels like air conditioning. So when you see from inside, this is the actual detail. There is a security layer where you don't fall down. There's one that don't allow small objects to drop down, and then there's a horizontal slider which allows the ventilation to come in. So when this horizontal is fully open and when it's raining and there's breezes, you have this strong cool winds that comes into your apartment. You can travel, get out of Singapore and keep your horizontal window slider, monsoon windows open and not worry about rain getting in. So the apartments are always nice and fresh smelling. So this is one of the nice devices that we sort of came up with for this. But one thing to note is that there's a term that we like to use. Our apartments usually are one apartment deep. Just now too, I also mentioned one classroom deep. This is essential for good effective cross ventilation, not to have very deep plans in the tropics, because you do want to create as much openings, fenestration to be operable to allow cross ventilation within the spaces. So as you can see, this is one of the apartments. You have all these monsoon windows as a horizontal ledge at 1 meter throughout the living and the bedroom spaces. So you don't really need to open any other windows. All you need to do is just to keep these horizontal ledges open, so you can actually see them. They are all open and quite used by the residents. And as an overall, this is what you see of the building. Okay, we scale up in terms of residential towers. This was a competition in 2001. It was a very important project for us. We helped crystalline some of the vertical high-rise living for us. Also at the same time, high density and high amenity for dense cities. Our submission was really about creating a 50-story superstructure building, and but create sky streets and sky gardens at every 5 floors. People would use the fast lift, high-speed lift on the 2 sides, and exit at every 5 floors, and then be able to walk up or down 2 or 3 stories to get to your apartments. Almost like these little shop houses that you see below. They are 2 to 3 stories. So on the same scale, you are walking 2 to 3 stories. So these are all traditional shop houses. That's how we sort of live in the past without lifts. We walk 2 to 3 stories. There's no reason why we can't do that. But to afford universal accessibility, we also have localized lifts to allow people to move furniture, for people in a wheelchair or people elderly, as well as people, kids in prams, to actually move up and down. But we want to encourage healthy living, active mobility, but also at the same time, create a sense of community. This is very important. This is a public housing project we felt was necessary to talk about how to foster a community here. And we think about it, when you're in a lift, you hardly talk to anyone. But when you're walking along horizontally in a street, in a park, you would look at other people, and sometimes your eyes cross and you have connection. When you're in a lift, everyone, because of a very congested space, no one says anything. No one's even looked at each other. So I think it's a very antisocial element within a vertical typology. We wanted to create horizontal movement that facilitate encounters. So the idea was to be able to create sky streets and sky gardens for the use of people, and to also create a sense of community. For public housing, we felt this was very necessary. That is the difference between private housing and public housing. If you want subsidized housing, you must want to live in a community, and that we must engender a community spirit within the development. So this was the simulation almost 20 years ago of what this sky gardens would be like. It is quite common nowadays, but this was our very first attempt at it. Even this rendering was quite hard to do. Those little creatures, those little people at the bottom is my brother, my mother, my father, and that I had to climb up a 5-story building to get them to be at the bottom, to photograph them so that we can Photoshop them into this rendering. So the exercise was translated into execution by actually going up 5 stories to get that scale, be able to translate this into a rendering to convince people. We didn't win this primarily because we broke too many rules. We were given an honorable mention. We were told this was a very good effort, but we broke too many rules. But what's interesting is that 10 years later, we were invited by the government to try to realize some of these ideas. But we didn't win the competition, but it certainly caught the eyes and the ears of some developers. We were asked to do another tower, 36-story tower, very small apartments, but in a fairly good location, prime location in Singapore, in Newton area. But we really wanted to try to create community spaces within a tower typology, because the apartments by now were getting smaller, primarily because of real estate value. All the apartments were, becoming, with each development, the apartment size got smaller. So by the time it got to this now, we were dealing with a 2-bedroom apartment that were only 60 square meters, and that the 3-bedroom apartment was 75 to 80 square meters. So they're very small apartments, and that we felt space was starting to be an issue, and that we needed to create some sort of open community spaces. And they came in the form of sky gardens, because URA at that time was trying to promote sky gardens, and they made sky gardens exempt from GFA without paying development charge. But nobody did it, primarily because no one wanted to pay the extra cost for it, because they come at a price. But we managed to come up with a design to convince the developer that we must provide this because your apartments are getting small. We need to create more public space. But how we did it is that we actually trade off, instead of having an underground basement, we do a multi-story car park and have the public amenities on top. With that, we were able to save some few $1 million and create these pocket sky gardens at every 5 stories, creating a 5-story stratum sort of up the building. So you can see this little drawing. Is the 4 apartment with the public facilities is kind of detached from a multi-story car park. But then you can see they are at every 5-story, it comes off the public lift, the community lift, and it's actually a small little public space that is flanked by a vertical green wall that is actually next to the fire escape. It's put next to the fire escape so that it actually can be easily maintained. So you can see as a section, when you come up the lift, you look into this garden space, a vertical garden space of 5 stories that is flanked by a green wall and a fire escape. So if you wanted to walk up and down these 5 stories of sky gardens, you also can do it with this staircase. So you could also engender a nice community within this development itself. So it's actually quite nice. We find that it's actually very used by young families with sort of small kids, also youngish people who likes to hang out here and smoke. But yeah, but nevertheless, it's a pretty good social space that we created for this development. But what was also good too is that when you have horizontal buildings in the tropics, you do need to shade the roof. The form dictates that you shade the roof because it's horizontal and its largest surface exposed to the sun and the elements. But when you're talking about vertical tower, it is not the roof, because the roof is a very small footprint compared to the surface area of the tower itself. This tower, we have it all 100% shaded by all these horizontal fins and balconies. So in terms of the apartments inside, they are very well thermally insulated and shaded. Another developer to notice us then, and that we were given a very nice commission of a larger scale in Bangkok. And that in Bangkok, all the buildings, residential buildings, were designed somewhat like office buildings, all central core and sealed office space as a sort of compact floor plan. It's not the right typology for residential apartments, because we needed to create more surface areas to have cross ventilation through operable windows and doors. So this is the traditional way they would do it, a central core with space, sealed space all around it. What we did was we pull it apart, have 3 towers instead, and apartments that will be able to have almost 4 sides with openings, operable windows and doors. That effected very good cross ventilation throughout it. But at the same time, we bridge across the towers for structural stability and also creating private and public spaces. Every 6 floors are private spaces with swimming pools, and it's divided into 3 vertical stacks of almost about 20 stories, and we have public amenities at these levels. They are either green or blue, creating public spaces. And this is the resultant, a very perforated tower typology that allows sort of wind to actually move across it. It is not the same as One Moment Rise, which I talk about, which we created the monsoon windows, which is like having lots of small little windows, lots of holes in the buildings. These are larger holes. But what makes the difference for this one is that this is a very tall building, it's almost over 200 meters tall. Because of the height, we were able to create a vertical breezeway. So when it doesn't when it's actually not windy or breezy, it's very still. Because of the height, you have a hot vertical stack within this vertical breezeways that would cause an effective ventilation through open spaces in the apartments, and then being drawn through the apartments into these vertical funnels. So this is the fenestration. You can see they are all sliding windows and doors that can be fully open between structures. And then the private swimming pools every 6 floors. On the 9th floor, which is the public amenity, we didn't build a basement. It's not advisable to build basements in Bangkok because of the high water table. So it's above ground car parking. The amenities on the 9th floor, but we also created lots of water elements so that we can actually draw wind through these vertical elements, horizontal blue elements, and the then it moves up the vertical breezeways. So you can see this is a swimming pool on the 9th floor. And in between the towers are these sort of reflection pools. And as you look up, you have this vertical breezeways. So the apartments are open on all sides. And this is the site that opens up to the vertical breezeways. So that we have measured this post-construction surveys. You have something like a vertical movement of 2 to 2.5 movement of meters per second of breezes vertically when measured at the top. So that means that we were able to create very good cross ventilation through the apartments if you keep the windows and doors open. But what's really quite nice about this project was that it's still being talked about and discussed, and that quite recently I went back to it after this was built more than 10, 15 years, and that there was one buyer who actually, sort of local buyer, who actually bought this, who not only bought 1 apartment, he eventually bought 15 apartments for his family and for his friends to live in. He was obviously quite a well-to-do person, but he said that he buys only this apartment permanent because he could open the windows and doors to have good cross ventilation and fresh air. So this is such an endorsement for some of the strategies that we put in place at the beginning. So this was a project that I mentioned that after 10 years, not winning the public housing Duxton Plain competition, we were asked by the government to reimagine what public housing should be for Singapore. And for us, the community agenda was top of our list. We felt it was very necessary to create a sense of community here. and also create sufficient public spaces, community spaces for the residents here. But also at the same time, we now started to realize that in a land-limited Singapore, where it is necessary for us to create high density, high amenity scenarios, and that what we need to do is to be creative at how to create more real estate that is actually usable by the community. So these are some drawings to show you about the systems that are considered. And here you would have on the left a very traditional messing of the 3 towers made up of about 4 apartments. We turn them into vertical breezeway by creating a space in between these towers in a diamond-shaped plan. And then we started to divide them again into stacks, having between these stacks, sky gardens, sky parks, we call them, that are almost 200 meters in length. And then we, of course, kept the ground floor as open as possible, a public space, actually a park, and keeping as many of the trees as possible, and to top up with a solar canopy. And then when you put all the systems together, you get the resultant form of this high-rise community tower typology. So you can see the sort of a typical floor plan overlaid with the ground plan, the site plan. The trees in front were all capped because they are very mature trees, and that they will be around for many, many more years, even hundreds, 200 years if they're being well kept. And that we created this diamond-shaped plan to create vertical breezeways. And that you can actually see apartments are on one side, and then we have the sky gardens and sky parks on the other side. This happens every 11th floor. It happens 3 times, and the very roof is a public park for people. We call it the penthouse for the public because private condominiums and towers, the top is the penthouses reserved for the elite. Here, you have access to the very top as a viewing gallery. So the ground floor, you can see these mature rain trees that we have kept is a vibrant public space. We also thought of this as a city within a city, where we created plazas, food courts, childcare centers, and convenience stores. In some ways, creating an essential 15-minute city for this development of about 1,000 dwelling units. This picture of this gathering of these 3 people is what we call the common living room. You see this comfortable looking seats, they're actually concrete. Because this is public housing, they have to be super durable. So they are designed as soft concrete, but to make it look like soft furniture, but at the same time, very durable. Even the light fittings are specially designed to be very durable and maintenance free. But this is something that if you analyze how people go about living in sort of a public housing, people will gather their letters at this from the letter boxes. And we felt that it's a very good time, a convenient time to have people get to know one another. So we created this sitting areas next to the letter boxes, so that when you take your letter out and you read them, you can sit here and actually create opportunities to meet your neighbors. So as you can see, the vertical tower typologies, we have created sky parks and gardens at every 11 floors. But what is important to note is that these are meaningful sky gardens. You need to walk past these gardens and link ways to go to your apartments. Your apartments have got openings on all 4 sides, creating very effective cross ventilation and natural light to come in. At the same time, all these open walkways and corridors encourages social cohesion and also security by themselves as well, because it is so open and so visible. There is hardly need for too much surveillance here or security. But what is really meaningful is that every 10 stories, right, we have 80 units, and we call this one Sky Village. And this Sky Village would have these common areas that you see here, where we have open spaces that people can come and use and gather. This was a sort of concept that we came up with in the Duxton Plain competition, which we realized. And what is really quite nice is that we also done a survey about this. And I think this was one of Professor Nirmal's PhD students. As compared to a development next to it, which was built at the same time, the residents here knows 30% more of their neighbors than the other development. Also, at the same time, the energy usage, the utility bills is 25 to 30% cheaper than the other one as well. So all the strategies that we put in place also work very well through all these post-construction surveys that we've come to know. So as I mentioned before, it was very important that all these sky gardens and walkways are sort of very visible, so that it's like you know, you could, if you have your kids and your grandparents in this deck playing and enjoying these common facilities, when you come home, you can see them and you can even talk to them. We decided that we won't make it 5 floors in Duxton Plain competition, primarily because when we calculated the cost, it went above the estimated construction budget. But then thinking back from the days where I lived in public housing, it was a 10-story block. And I remember being on the ground floor, screaming to my very best friend who lives on the 10th floor. I could yell at him, and I could also recognize his face. And I think this is very important because it informed me that this is the extent that you can actually recognize and actually hear a person in terms of number of stories. So we use that benchmark to create villages at every 10 stories, because you can still hear and see the people on this common Sky Village green areas. So when you see them as they're stacked, they're rather interesting. And this is one of the vertical breezeways as well. And that it also causes, because of this, there's also very good effective cross ventilation in the apartments. That also resulted in the 25 to 30% lower in utility bills. So these are the sky parks at every 11 stories. It has a very beautiful commanding view. The apartments are planned very simply. The internal walls and partitions are all removable to be reconfigured. Columns are on the outside. But what you see at the middle, we have a horizontal window to make our monsoon window more affordable. It's become this horizontal window that is a casement window that is at 900 height. This is where when you sit down, the wind actually comes in and makes you sort of feel cool. So this was the top where it becomes a public sort of park where you have very good views of the city. Okay, we look at a different typology, something very green now. This started our drive into creating a lot more landscaping, nature in our buildings. This visually has excited the sort of the media. It's very recognized as a green building, not just for sustainability, but for integrating greenery into buildings. This came about primarily because we wanted to find a unique selling point for this development and create a hotel in the garden. So that was the basis of the design, the concept to the developer, and they felt that it was a good one, and they went along with it. But what is actually important about this development too is that we convinced this hotel operator that we do not enclose the entire hotel and air condition everything. We need to take a critical view of your program and your spaces and only air condition the spaces where it's essential. So basically, we only air condition the guest rooms themselves and the public areas, but only limited to the restaurants and the reception areas. The recreational spaces are open. All the circulation spaces are as open as possible. We reduce the amount of spaces to be ventilation by 40%, hereby reducing the energy load as well. So this is an important decision to make at the beginning to convince the developer, the owners, to take a environmental rethink about how the building should be used and how they can be enjoyed. So, but one thing too, we wanted to do when we decided that we wanted to make this a hotel in a garden was to match the generosity of a philanthropist in 1876. This park you see in front, Hong Lim Green, was donated by him. He contributed $3,000 then, which is a huge amount of money, to buy this and turn it into a public park for workers. We wanted to do the same thing, contribute the same amount of civic generosity by creating the same amount of landscaping, horizontal landscaping in the development. So we doubled this Hong Lim Park. So by creating horizontal platforms, sky gardens and terraces, that is equivalent in the area of this Hong Lim Green. One of the ways that we are able to manage to do all this integrated landscaping is because we evaluated with the clients how to spend money wisely on this development. We chose not to do a basement car parking, which when you do one, at the end of the day, basement car parking is the vanity of city planners. They want to put away cars, even though you created all these roads that cars flying away, they want to put car parks in the basement because they don't want to see them as well. And they sterilize the ground floor if you put it on the ground. We felt it was necessary for us to, but when you do basement, you commit yourself to the lifespan of the building to mechanical ventilation and lighting. We felt that we wanted to not build this and save the money of building the basement and create an above ground car parking, but use this car parking as the structural infrastructure to create this landscape. So on the ground level, we also minimize the site coverage, creating very good linear gardens as a walkway, a public walkway for public. And also big covered spaces for the drop-off that can actually use for event spaces as well. Architecturally, the way for us to handle this integrated landscaping was to conceive this building as a geological sort of a formation that is interlocking with glass blocks massing. So we were using sort of this contouring to create the landscape and also to be able to have planters and sky gardens being supported by it. Internally, there's very little between what the internal aesthetics and the outdoor aesthetics is. It's the continuation of the sort of natural contour lines into the interiors as landscaping elements. And this is a section. It looks, you can see it all. There's no basement. Level 1 and 2 is the public spaces of the hotel. Level 3 and 4 is the car parking. It's also the floor that supports most of the landscaping. And the 5th floor is a full recreational floor of swimming pools, outdoor terraces, and the spa itself, and the spa. And this is not air conditioned. It has a volume of 3 to 4 stories before the guest room starts. And it's completely porous space that allows air movement across it. And then you can see further sky gardens above at every 4 stories with the apartments, not the apartments, the hotel guest rooms looking out through the gardens. So this is the 5th level. You overlook the Hong Lim Park, where you get a very good commanding view. And this is also the 5th level. You could hardly think that this is actually at a 5th story, but it's an interesting pathway that we've created in this podium that is actually a 400-meter walk that you can go around this building, intertwining in these contours and intertwining in landscape. So as you look up, you see the sky terraces. And as a plan, this is how it's sort of works. You have double-loaded corridors perpendicular to the long site, and then all the rooms looks into open courtyards that has landscaping in them. The walk to your guest rooms are open as much as possible. You go through bridges overlooking all these gardens, cascades of water, and as if it is actually a garden path to your guest rooms. And when you see them vertically as a facade, it's a beautiful vertical garden. And this is a civic gesture for the adjacent neighbors, which is actually public housing. We feel it's necessary for buildings to be friendly, to create a better view for neighbors as well. So by creating gardens within that are enjoyed by the owners themselves, by the users, but it also benefits the neighbor. This is an important point that I will talk about in my second part of the lecture, where we think it's important to have civic generosity in the way we design buildings. So when you're inside the hotel guest rooms, you're looking out into gardens and then the city views. This is a very typical vertical typology. It is a typology that you see very common in New York. It's a skyscraper typology. The footprint of this site is only 50 meters by 50 meters, but this is a different sort of environmental device that we use. We created a double skin. So you can see a traditional messing will be a sort of a block. We chop them up into 4 stratums and have got sky gardens and terraces between them. Namely, they are the car park level, and then we have the office level, and then we have two types of hotel above that. They have so they are, this one are not a true space. It is actually a L-shaped messing and 2 sides open. This is called a breezeway atrium, and we actually wrap the whole thing with a green facade that results in this sort of a living facade that you will see later. And then that's the resultant form of it, the last one. What it has is that we have created all this horizontal stratified sky terraces, and with the vertical facade, we created a green replacement of 1100%. What it means is that we have green replacement for 10 other sites. We created, we put in 30 species of plants and trees in the sky terraces and 20 species of creepers on the facades. So this is what you see of it today. And these are the breezeway atriums. They are wonderful above ground, almost ground level spaces where you have trees, you have a lawn, and you can actually have people running around it. They have yoga classes here, and which is so unusual because in any skyscraper, you don't have outdoor spaces like this. But what is really quite different about this, it has got so much volume and so much open spaces and naturally ventilated spaces. So this is actually a very radical rethink of the skyscraper typology. So you can see, looking from the guest rooms, looking down into this lawn and these garden spaces. When we created this vertical facades, we were thinking about bringing back biodiversity. And what was really interesting when we thought about it was that with Newton Suites and with Park Royal and Pickering, we were able to create horizontal habitats for animals that could fly in, birds and insects. But we couldn't create a habitat for climbing animals. So when we created these horizontal sky terraces, we needed a device that allows climbing animals to come up, like squirrels. So this vertical device is not just an environmental shading device for the buildings, it's also a climbing structure for animals. And what is really nice is that I've been told by the general manager that every morning they see squirrels on the 11th floor where they have the reception. So the roof is also another garden level. But what is fundamentally important as a principle for city planning? You see all these linear parks here, Duxton Plain and Sportis's Park. This building itself, even though the building occupies the entire site area, it has the same amount of biodiversity in it, the same amount of species of biodiversity in it. That is interesting because in a built environment, a very dense built environment, we can also create living habitats for animals. So thinking about this, it's actually very good to place this building next to this park so that you can extend the habitats for nature. So if you see it from the bottom looking up, you don't see a building, but you see a vertical green cliff. But we did some analysis of the Kundal did some analysis of the building. But what it actually does is that you can see the temperature, surface temperature of the adjacent building and the green facade that we have is almost 25 to 30 degrees lower, almost half the glass and steel building. So in terms of enhancing energy efficiency, this green facade is doing quite a good job. But at the same time, it's also very good for addressing urban heat island effect in the city, so that we do not contribute more heat and reflect more heat to the surrounding area. Okay, Kampong Admiralty. I may not talk a lot about it. I do want to encourage you all to go and see it. It's a very, I think for us, a very successful integrated development comprising of social, environmental strategies. Very quickly, the messing, we created a step roof platform to create a secure and public park for the elderly housing, public space, a very vibrant public space in the ground level, solar canopy, and then the resultant form. But what is critical about this development is the integration of stakeholders. This was the brief that we had, but they all think they're all going to get an individual buildings. But what we did is that we used a horizontal sandwich approach, club sandwich approach, where we layer the different users in a way that when layered together had a very effective synergistic quality to it. Ground floor is kept as an open plaza to let public facilities and events to take place. Second floor is the hawker center. Third and fourth is the medical center. Fifth and sixth is the daycare facilities and also the elderly housing. So if you see as a composition, we have a private, secure sky park that allows the residents, the elderly, to use, but it's also a public. And below it is actually a medical center. They have medical healthcare at the doorstep. You can see it's a higher, a sort of a step platform, like a hill behind, because it shields the MRT noise from coming into the living spaces. We also convinced we went beyond our site. This is one thing as designers, if you want to do good, you need to think beyond your site area. Here, we've encouraged the HDB and the government to rework the spaces next to it to encourage a better pedestrian community flow of people to the MRT station and to use the facility. What was this space before was actually car park spaces and service driveways, but we turned it into a pedestrian space full of gardens and playgrounds for young. This is the public space. It's very actively used. It's covered, it's tropical, it's open, breezy, and that rain or shine, you can actually use it. The public space plaza is the community living room. The hawker center is the community dining room. This is the medical center that looks into a courtyard. And the residents looks into this sky park. This sky park has got young and old sort of amenities. The daycare facilities are located behind, and that in front are actually 3-generation playgrounds and event spaces for them. And what is actually interesting for us is this is the first time we created a vertical sort of a phytoremediation system where water is actually collected on the roof, and through all the planters that steps down, we clean all this rainwater before it's collected, reused for irrigation, and then any excess discharged into the public drains. This process is enjoyed through rain chains and vertical waterfalls within the development. So when it rains, this is a very interesting, vibrant gardens to look at. But what is also noteworthy too is that there is a linear park that is actually located here. It's called Woodlands Emerald Garden. And our park space, our sky park, is about the same size, but we have 50 species, whereas the one on the ground at 33 species. And that's because of the landscaping that we put in. It has a lot more fruiting quality to it. It attracts a more flowering quality to it. It has more insects and birds coming to it than the other one, which is basically very hard. It's recreational. And what they do is that they fumigate it a lot as well. So they basically, every time they fumigate, they kill all the insects. Whereas Kampong Admiralty, because we've located the community farm within it, they have to resist fumigation, and they have to use sort of green friendly pesticides, organic pesticides. So what it all means for us when we have all this.
Sorry, Mansam. I think
yes.
we might have to wrap up
this
presentation. Because I'm sure there's so many amazing projects, but I think we probably need to give some time for questions.
Okay,
So is
I
that
was
okay? Is it okay to do this in the second part maybe? Or
yes,
yeah,
yes, I will do that in the
yeah,
second part.
yeah. Sorry to interrupt. Yeah,
No
I just
problem. I'll stop
I think
share
it's
now.
only
Yes.
five. Yeah, thank you, thank you. Okay, so very quickly then we'd like to open this lecture for questions from the students as well as the other guests that we have. Please jump right in. So many amazing projects. Thank you so much, Mansam. It was so inspiring always to hear you speak.
I have to tell you, Mansam, that an alumni of the program was listening to your talk, and we were texting each other to say that it never gets tiring because he's heard it before, and it's still very interesting. So
Yeah.
there's something to discover every time you hear it.
Mm. Please jump in and ask questions.
We'll start
And
with anyone in the main room. Anyone? Raise your hand. Just switch on your mic.
I think everyone is probably blown away by the
I guess you
amazing
could always
project.
ask the questions in the next part too, if you do have some questions.
Yeah,
And of course, I'll be seeing them too. They can always ask questions later as well.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, people, the guests who are attending as well, please type your questions in the chat
Yeah,
space.
in the chat room.
Yeah. Students, please raise your hand if you have a question.
While they contemplate this, Mansam, I just want to ask you because and this is more a point of clarification. I think that what specific systems, if you have to break it down, right, are the buildings addressing? And I wonder if you can just enumerate this because a lot of what we've seen, we kind of infer from this what systems the architect deals with. But what have you specifically been tackling?
Mm. I think there are quite a few systems, and the few systems have different ways of informing the form. When we talk about sort of a passive strategy of creating ventilation and effective sort of nice sort of breezy spaces, we are actually talking about creating more voids than messing. I think that's a fundamental shift. That's why I call it SOTA the cheese building, because we were focused on designing the voids rather than the buildings. So in some ways, it's the negative and the positive that you're looking at. So in terms of air as a system, you are actually designing negative voids, negative forms, and so instead of one massive form and you play with shaping it, it's all about fragmenting the form, breaking up into components. So even with the house, that's why I thought about it. Instead of showing too many of the new projects, I got so much new projects that I haven't even shown. That I thought it's better for the students to see it at a smaller scale, something that they could relate to. So that's why I still showed houses, which I think is essential, where the Maple House was quite a classic one, where it was actually two boxes, just pulling it apart, having this circulation space. That was a very sort of a small, the very first horizontal breezeway they created. So it was about creating that negative space rather than creating the enclosed spaces of the bedrooms and the living rooms. So as a system is interesting to think that you are dealing with negative forms rather than solid messing. Then the other one that I think is also sort of the formal approach is important is to think about landscaping. And this is where you need to start thinking like a plant and a tree, how as a plant and a tree I will survive. And I think there's a lot of bad examples nowadays because it's gone. I think integrated landscaping seems to be the new ism. So it's the danger of people having plants that don't thrive on buildings is going to be what we're going to see very soon. You really need to think as a plant, you need to be able to be supported by a horizontal surface supporting soil. All trees need to do that. If you don't have that, it won't survive. You also need sunlight. So your plants cannot be shaded. You can't put it deep in your plants. A lot of people draw them deep in their plants. It doesn't work. It needs to be at least a 60-degree, not even 45-degree. It needs to be a 60-degree of sun. And the problem with that is that your plant starts to lean out, because they always lean towards sunlight. So you need to create a volume, on the other side to make it even and to actually have reflected surfaces to bounce the light so that you can tell the plant, you are like on the ground where you have space, you have sunlight, and you have, coming to it. So you almost need to think like a plant and create the condition for it. And then it informs you how to create the forms. Stepping profiles are good because when you step back, you open up the space on top for plants. Vertical ones are only good for climbers, where like WOHA Hotel, it's less formal. It's a more a device where we create lots of planters and allow them to grow up a surface like a cliff where you have creepers growing on it. So we are creating that surface for it to grow. So I think there is landscaping is a very essential one. And then when you think about water too is another system as well, where for us, water now is interesting. I don't know whether I'll be showing some of the pictures later. We have a project that is going to be in China where it's nothing but a wonderful water cascade coming down. Because China is so used to the concept of sponge city, where they are trying to have water percolate to the ground rather than have too much extensive ground concrete surfaces. So they're doing a lot of sort of percolating water back to the ground. But I felt in dense city environments, you don't have that much ground to deal with anyway. How can you contribute to the discussion? So we created a building that was like a slice of a hill with a waterfall, basically, where water starts to channel from the top and you can actually see it cascading down to the bottom where it becomes a reservoir. So I think it is actually possible to think of whatever systems and create the form for it. So that's why the title is really Form Follow Systems. And the more systems you think about, the more variations the form comes in. And then the integration part comes in, where you need to put together all these different systems. And that's when you juggle and your forms again changes. So the more sort of, if you tend to one systems, your form tends to reflect very clearly on one systems. But when you start integrating the systems, and I think Kampong Admiralty for me is integrated a lot more systems. The form is not so clear in terms of what systems it addresses. Whereas, say, Para and Pickering is actually clearer. WOHA Hotel is clearer. So there is a difference to it. And I think, again, it's interesting as an architect. You have all these variations in it, all this gray between black and white that you deal with. But you just need to start allowing the form to be generated by the systems.
I think we need to close the session, but there's one question that is emerging, many strands of about vertical greenery to do with how that, about the views, balancing the views, natural ventilation, wind-driven rain, mosquito infestation, structural modifications. They're all questions related to this vertical garden. So if you'd like to take that one question, which is many questions in one
Yeah,
question.
I get that a lot, these questions, and I actually think it's no different from any other projects. As an architect, you have to address design not from a big picture point of view, but also from a small picture point of view. You got to handle maintenance, you got to handle rain coming in. All these are fairly technical, and you just have to apply your technical skills to it. There's no magic to it. If you have all this vertical landscaping, immediately you do need to think of maintenance. And that's where when I mentioned just now in Newton Suites, we placed a vertical green wall next to the fire staircase. Because what is the fire staircase there for? It's for emergency, fire escape, for people to move up and down. But why don't we use it for maintenance of the vertical landscape? So this is how you do it. You need to make better use of your building. Every component, again, like what we always like to say, no mono use. We have to think of multi-use. Your fire staircase can be used as a maintenance device to maintain your green walls. All this can be done. This is very straightforward. It's all very technical, and as a competent architect, you should be able to handle all this part of it. In cities, you talk about views, right? What is a view? Another ugly building next door, a very cold building next door? Or do you want to create some gardens to look as foreground before you have that behind? So I think it doesn't block your view. You're creating your own view. And I think that's what we did in a lot of our projects. We control our own destiny. We create our own environment. We create our own views. This is how we sell this to the client. You know, there's a lot of buildings, you built it and it's beautiful, and all it takes is your neighbor come here and put a very solid facade next to you, blocks your views, blocks your ventilation, and hey, your real estate value goes away. So I think this is something that in my mind, it's always about controlling our own destiny. And I think that also is very fundamental to how the second part of our lecture is about humans being able to control our own destiny.
Thank you. I think that's I remember the study that was done by the PhD student, and he actually found that your semi-outdoor spaces, the breezeway atria and all that, they are generating a microclimate for the building. And I think that reinforces what you're saying about creating the environment, not just relying on the weather or the climate or the city as a condition, but rather creating a set of conditions within the building. And so the way that you sculpt form very often is about creating these internal conditions that represent greatness. Can we take one last question, Swinal, from Nidhi? She's got a hand up for quite a long time.
Yeah, sure, of course.
Nidhi, you want to switch on your mic?
Go ahead.
Yeah. Hello. Thank you, Prof. It was really amazing seeing some older projects by WOHA on a building scale. So my question is related to it that in theory or in class, we learn about 5 to 6 systems that we further work on a fewer systems that are important to a specific site and mostly on the urban scale. But what about the systems that come in forefront while we work on smaller projects like you did and application of it in the practical? So are there any other systems that we should think about while we work on smaller scale projects?
I think, yeah, good point. We tend to only sort of simplify things into 4 or 5 systems. And there's always this danger where we reduce things into very clear delineation and simplify the problems. The climate change problem is never so simple and never so one strand, which is just carbon emission and it's just 1.5 degrees. It's just not like that. The topic is very wide. And I think the second part of my lecture, I want to try to expand the discussion a lot wider. But for houses, and I think a lot of you are young people, young architects. I think for me, everything can be a system, social system, cultural systems, all this make a lot of difference. And I think one of my favorite um, kind of projects is always about public and social housing. And that has a lot of social systems to deal with. How you how you create communities, how you agenda some of these social issues. You know, when I talked about a living village and being an inclusive, endanger and gender inclusive society, it was very important to address not just the development, but to address the entire precinct. You know, we even talked to the owner, which is SG Enable, and to ask them to talk to the neighbors, and then ask them, is it okay if we open without a fence, open the park up, encourage people to come in? The MPs liked it, you know, the politicians liked it, you know. This is more than just the design. It's just more than just the buildings. It really is the bigger picture. So I think this is where we cannot miss the forest for the trees. As I said, we must always see the bigger picture. So when you deal with small projects, don't think it's a small picture, a small project. Do not limit yourself. Don't call it small. Okay, you need to think big, regardless of scale. All right, that will be my advice for you.
Thank you, Prof.
Very inspiring. Can I just say to everyone here who's got a burning question that we have a second session, and you're welcome to keep your question for later. You can always refer back to something that Mansam said in the first lecture. We see this as a continuum rather than two distinct parts. Yeah. So, and I see a lot of questions in the chat room that are now popping up. It's everybody's getting warmed up as we wrap up. So please come back. We start again at 2. And Mansam, if there's any part of your presentation that you want to carry over to the second, just see it as a continuous thing. Yeah.
I might do it if we have time in the studios, because I think the second one is pretty heavy too.
Okay.
So I'm going to try and keep to my time, because I have allocated more time for discussion the next one.
All right, brilliant.
Okay.
How very nice of you, though, to share so much with all of us. Thank you. Really, thanks so much for an amazing presentation, sharing your thoughts and your points of view. Thank you, all the attendees, in particular the guests who've joined us today. But before you go, just make a note in case you haven't registered. The second talk will be at 2 p.m. and registration is open. For those of you who'd like to know more about the MSc ISD program, please visit our website. Again, thanks everyone for joining us. Take care, stay safe, and thank you very much, Mansam, once again from all of us. Thank you.
See you all at 2.
See you later.
Thank you. Bye.